All right, whether you're settling into bed, driving through quiet streets, working late into the evening, or simply seeking a gentle escape from the day, welcome. Tonight, we travel back 250,000 years into the shadowed caves of South Africa, where firelight flickered against limestone walls and shadows held secrets of a mysterious human species. This is the story of Homo Naledi, the enigmatic cave dwellers whose very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about our ancient past. If this kind of deep, immersive storytelling helps you unwind, helps you drift away from the present moment, or simply fills the quiet spaces of your evening, let me know in the comments. Do you listen to fall asleep, to focus while you work, somewhere in between? And if this journey through deep time resonates with you, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might find peace in these ancient stories. Content like this, unhurried and contemplative, built for minds that are still curious, even in the quiet hours. All right, let's descend into the darkness together. Picture this in your mind. You are standing at the entrance of a cave system in South Africa, the cradle of humankind, where the earth has kept its secrets for 250,000 years. The entrance is narrow, barely wide enough for a human body to slip through. Beyond that opening lies a labyrinth of chambers, passages that wend deeper and deeper into the earth, where sunlight has never touched the walls and silence reigns absolute. This is the Rising Star Cave, and within its depths, something extraordinary was waiting, something that would force us to reconsider the very nature of what it means to be human. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's begin at the beginning, in a world so different from ours that it might as well have been another planet entirely. 250,000 years ago, the landscape of South Africa looked nothing like it does today. The climate was cooler, wetter. Vast grasslands stretched to the horizon, broken by clusters of trees and meandering rivers. This was a world where massive creatures roamed, where saber-toothed cats stalked through tall grass, where early elephants trumpeted warnings across the savanna. And somewhere in this ancient landscape, in caves carved by water and time, lived a species we now call Homo Naledi. Think about this for a moment. While our own species, Homo sapiens, was just beginning to emerge in distant corners of Africa, these cave dwellers were already living complex lives, already facing the fundamental questions that haunt all conscious beings. Who were they? What did they understand about life, about death, about the darkness that surrounded them both literally and figuratively? The first clue to their existence came not from the surface world they once knew, but from the depths where they chose to place their dead. Deep within the Rising Star Cave system, in a chamber so remote and difficult to reach that modern cavers needed specialized equipment and extraordinary skill to access it, lay the remains of at least 15 individuals, men, women, children, all of them Homo Naledi, all of them deliberately placed there in the darkness, as if the living had made a conscious decision about where the dead should rest. Can you imagine the journey those ancient people made, carrying their deceased through narrow passages, squeezing through openings barely wide enough for a human body, navigating in absolute darkness with only the faintest firelight to guide them? This was not a casual disposal of the dead. This was something else entirely, something that suggested a level of abstract thinking, of symbolic behavior that we never expected to find in a species with a brain one-third the size of our own. But let's slow down. Let's not rush toward conclusions. Instead, let's try to understand who these people were by imagining what their daily lives might have looked like, what their world felt like, sounded like, smelled like in those distant millennia. The sun is setting over the South African grasslands 250,000 years ago. The air is cooling, and somewhere in the distance, a hyena calls to its pack. Near the entrance to what we now call Rising Star Cave, a small group of Homo Naledi individuals than modern humans, their bodies compact as preparing for the night. They are smaller and muscular, adapted for a life that required both endurance and agility. Picture them in your mind. Their faces are human-like but distinctly different. The skull is smaller, the jaw more prominent, the brow ridge more pronounced. Yet when you look into their eyes, there's something unmistakably familiar, an intelligence that seems to recognize its own limitations, a curiosity that drives them to explore not just the world around them, but the world within themselves. One of them, a female, tends to a small fire near the cave mouth. The flames dance across her features, casting moving shadows on the limestone walls behind her. She adds dried grass to the fire, then a few small branches, watching as the flames consume the fuel and throw light deeper into the cave entrance. This fire is not just for warmth or cooking. It is a beacon, a marker that says we are here, a small defiance against the overwhelming darkness of both night and cave. Around her, others of her group are engaged in the quiet activities that fill the evening hours. A male sits nearby, working on a stone tool, carefully chipping flakes from a piece of rock with patient, precise strikes. Each movement is deliberate, practiced. This is not random banging of stone against stone. This is craftsmanship, technique passed down through generations, refined through countless hours of practice. Think about what this means. This individual has not just learned to make tools, he has learned to make them well, to consider the properties of different stones, to understand how force and angle combine to create the desired result. In his hands, raw stone becomes something purposeful, something that extends his capabilities beyond what nature gave him. A younger member of the group, perhaps an adolescent, watches this tool making with focused attention. She is learning not just through observation, but through understanding. She can see the relationship between the napper's movements and the results those movements produce. When he adjusts his grip, she notices. When he changes the angle of his strike, she pays attention. This is education happening in real time. Knowledge flowing from one generation to the next through demonstration, practice, and patient repetition. But there's something else happening here, something subtler. As the toolmaker works, he occasionally glances toward the cave entrance, toward the darkness that extends beyond their firelight. His expression suggests he's thinking about something other than the immediate task at hand. Perhaps he's remembering something. Perhaps he's planning for tomorrow. Or perhaps he's contemplating something more abstract, more difficult to define. This is where our story becomes truly mysterious, because the archaeological evidence suggests that Homo Naledi was capable of abstract thought in ways that challenge our assumptions about intelligence, brain size, and cognitive capacity. They lived in a world where survival required constant attention to immediate concerns: food, water, shelter, safety from predators. And yet, They also lived in a world where they made deliberate choices about how to treat their dead, choices that required planning, cooperation, and symbolic thinking. As the fire burns lower, the female who has been tending it rises and moves toward the cave entrance. She carries with her a burning brand, a stick whose end glows with embers. The light it provides is small, almost pathetic against the vast darkness of the cave system beyond, but it is enough to see a few steps ahead, enough to navigate the familiar passages that lead deeper into the earth. She's not going far tonight, just to a chamber a short distance from the entrance, a place where the group stores food, tools, perhaps other items whose significance we can only guess at. But as she moves through the darkness, her footsteps echoing softly off stone walls, she is doing something remarkable. She is carrying light into places where light has never naturally existed. She is expanding the boundaries of her world through nothing more than controlled fire and human curiosity. Behind her, the others continue their evening activities. Some are preparing food, working with plants, and perhaps small pieces of meat by the light of the main fire. Others are engaged in what might be grooming behaviors, cleaning dirt from each other's skin and hair, checking for injuries or parasites. These activities are practical, necessary for health and survival. But they are also social, bonding activities that reinforce the connections between group members. And occasionally, very occasionally, one of them will look up from their immediate task and gaze into the darkness beyond their firelight. What are they thinking in those moments? What questions are forming in minds that are simultaneously so different from and so similar to our own? The archaeological record cannot tell us about their thoughts directly, but it can tell us about their actions. And their actions suggest a species grappling with concepts that go far beyond immediate survival needs. The placement of their dead in remote cave chambers required not just physical effort, but conceptual planning. Someone had to decide that this was the right thing to do. Someone had to convince others to participate. Someone had to remember where previous burials had taken place and make decisions about whether new burials should be placed in the same location or somewhere different. This suggests not just individual intelligence, but collective intelligence. Social structures complex enough to make and implement group decisions. Communication sophisticated enough to coordinate complicated activities. And perhaps, most remarkably, symbolic thinking sophisticated enough to treat death as something more than just the end of biological function. As the night deepens around our imagined group of Homo Naledi, the sounds of the African night begin to emerge from the darkness. In the distance, a lion roars, its call echoing across the grasslands. Closer by, insects chirp and buzz, creating a subtle symphony of small sounds. And from deeper within the cave system comes another sound entirely, the faint whisper of air moving through stone passages, the almost inaudible voice of the earth itself. The female with the burning brand returns from her brief expedition into the cave. She rejoins the group around the main fire, adding her branch to the flames and settling down beside the others. But she brings with her something more than just herself. She brings information, knowledge of the cave's condition, of whether anything has changed since her last visit, of whether the passages remain safe and accessible. This information sharing is crucial for a species that has chosen to live so intimately with the underground world. Caves are not static environments. Water levels change, rocks shift. Passages that were safe yesterday might be dangerous today. The group's survival depends on constantly updated knowledge of their subterranean domain. And as they settle down for sleep, arranging themselves around the dying fire, they do so with the confidence of beings who have made the darkness their ally rather than their enemy. They sleep not in fear of the cave, but in partnership with it. They have learned to read its moods, to understand its dangers, to appreciate its protection from the predators and weather of the surface world. But even in sleep, even in the security of their chosen refuge, they remain connected to mysteries that we are only beginning to understand. For in the deeper chambers of their cave, in places so remote that reaching them required deliberate expedition rather than casual exploration, lay the carefully placed remains of their ancestors. Generation after generation of Homo Naledi, positioned in the darkness with an intentionality that speaks to beliefs and practices we can observe but not fully comprehend. And as the embers of their fire fade to glowing ash, as the cave entrance disappears into the uniform blackness of an African night, the questions that surround these ancient people seem to grow larger, more profound, more haunting. What drove them to carry their dead into the deepest, most inaccessible parts of their underground world? What did they believe about death, about what happens to consciousness when the body stops functioning? Did they have concepts of afterlife, of spiritual continuation, of the kind of symbolic immortality that placement in a permanent, sacred space might provide? And perhaps most mysteriously of all, how did a species with such a small brain develop such sophisticated symbolic behavior? How did they bridge the gap between practical intelligence, the kind needed for tool making and survival, and abstract intelligence, the kind needed for ritual behavior and conceptual planning? These questions hover in the darkness above our sleeping group of Homo Naledi like unseen spirits, like the shadows of thoughts not yet fully formed. And as we prepare to delve deeper into their story, to explore the evidence that has emerged from the caves they once called home, we carry these questions with us into the depths, seeking answers in the places where light has never naturally reached. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, as our ancient cave dwellers rest in the security of their chosen darkness, the mystery of their existence continues to unfold, layer by layer, like the sediments that buried their bones and preserved their story for us to discover, hundreds of thousands of years later, in our own age of questions and wonder. In the morning light that filters through the cave entrance, our group of Homo Naledi begins to stir. The fire has burned down to glowing coals, but the warmth still radiates from the stone hearth they have carefully constructed over countless seasons. This is not just a random pile of rocks. This is architecture, deliberate and purposeful, designed to contain and direct heat efficiently through the long, cool nights of the South African highlands. The female who tended the fire the night before is the first to wake fully. She moves quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and begins the morning ritual of coaxing the embers back to flame. She knows exactly which dried grasses catch fire most easily, which small twigs will sustain the flame, which larger branches will provide lasting heat. This knowledge has been accumulated over years, decades perhaps, passed down through generations of firekeepers who understood that mastery of flame meant mastery over darkness, cold, and vulnerability. As she works, others begin to wake. They do so gradually, naturally, without the harsh alarm of modern life. Their internal rhythms are synchronized with the cycles of light and darkness, with the subtle changes in temperature that mark the transition from night to day. They wake because their bodies know it is time to wake, because the sounds and smells of morning are calling them back to consciousness. Think about this for a moment. These people are living in complete harmony with natural rhythms that we have largely forgotten. They sleep when darkness comes, wake when light returns. They eat when food is available, fast when it is not. Their lives are shaped by the fundamental patterns of existence rather than by artificial constructs of time and obligation. But do not mistake this natural living for simplicity. As the group fully awakens and begins the day's activities, the complexity of their social organization becomes apparent. There are roles, relationships, hierarchies, not the rigid structures of modern bureaucracy, but the fluid, adaptive arrangements that allow small groups to function efficiently in challenging environments. The male who was making tools the night before moves to check on his work, but first, he glances toward an older female in the group, waiting for some subtle signal. When she nods, almost imperceptibly, he proceeds. This exchange takes only seconds, but it reveals volumes about their social structure. Authority exists here, but it is based on experience, wisdom, and group consensus, rather than force or arbitrary power. The older female, perhaps 50 years old, which would make her ancient by the standards of this dangerous world, rises slowly and moves to the cave entrance. She stands there for several minutes, perfectly still, listening to the sounds of the morning. Her ears, trained by decades of survival, can distinguish between the normal sounds of an African dawn and the subtle variations that might indicate danger. She hears the calls of Hadada ibises in the distance, their raucous voices carrying across the grassland. She hears the rustle of small creatures in nearby bushes, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant splash of water over rocks in a stream, all normal sounds, all safe sounds. She nods to herself and returns to the group with the quiet confidence of someone whose judgment can be trusted completely. Now the day's work can begin in earnest. But what exactly does a day in the life of Homo Naledi look like? The archaeological evidence gives us clues, but so much remains mysterious, open to interpretation and imagination. Some members of the group prepare to venture out onto the grassland in search of food. They carry with them tools crafted over many hours of patient work, spear points hafted onto wooden shafts, cutting implements shaped from carefully selected stones. These tools represent not just individual skill, but collective knowledge, techniques refined over countless generations. But before they leave, they engage in what can only be described as strategic planning. They gather in a loose circle near the fire, and through a combination of gestures, simple vocalizations, and shared understanding, they coordinate their activities. Who will go where? Who will look for what? How will they communicate if they encounter danger or opportunity? This planning session reveals something remarkable about Homo Naledi cognition. They are not just reacting to immediate stimuli. They are anticipating future scenarios, preparing for contingencies, making decisions based on abstract reasoning about events that have not yet occurred. This is sophisticated mental processing, the kind that requires not just intelligence, but the ability to model complex relationships between cause and effect. As the hunting party prepares to leave, something interesting happens. The youngest member of the group, a child of perhaps 8 years old, approaches the leader of the expedition. The interaction that follows is brief but significant. The adult places a hand on the child's shoulder and speaks a few quiet sounds. The child nods solemnly and steps back. What just transpired? Was the child asking to go along? Was the adult explaining why the child must stay behind? Or was something else entirely being communicated? Something about responsibility, about learning, about the gradual process by which young Homo Naledi were integrated into the adult world of survival and decision making. We cannot know for certain, but the exchange suggests a level of social sophistication that challenges our assumptions about these ancient people. This is not just a species that has learned to use tools and control fire. This is a species that has developed complex systems for transmitting knowledge, for organizing group activities, for making collective decisions about survival strategies. As the hunting party disappears into the morning grassland, those who remain behind do not simply wait passively for their return. The cave becomes a center of intense activity, a workshop where various essential tasks are carried out with practiced efficiency. Near the entrance, where the light is best, several individuals work on tool maintenance and creation. The process of making a useful stone implement is far more complex than simply banging two rocks together. It requires understanding of geology, of how different types of stone fracture, of how force and angle combine to create desired shapes. It requires planning, patience, and the ability to visualize the finished product while looking at raw material. Watch as one of them works. She holds a piece of flint in her left hand, a hammerstone in her right. But before she strikes, she examines the flint carefully, turning it in the light, running her fingers over its surface, feeling for imperfections or natural fracture lines. She's reading the stone like we might read a book, gathering information that will determine her approach to shaping it. When she finally strikes, the blow is precise, controlled. A flake of stone breaks away, leaving a sharp edge. But she is not finished. She examines the result, compares it to some internal template of what she is trying to create, then strikes again and again. Each blow is informed by the results of the previous one, each adjustment bringing her closer to her goal. This is not random trial and error. This is systematic problem solving, the application of accumulated knowledge to achieve a specific outcome, and it is happening in the mind of a being whose brain is 1/3 the size of ours. How is this possible? How did Homo Naledi develop such sophisticated cognitive abilities with such limited neural hardware? This question haunts researchers who study these ancient people because it challenges our fundamental assumptions about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. Perhaps intelligence is not simply a function of raw computational power. Perhaps it is more about organization, about efficiency, about the specific ways in which neural networks are structured and connected. Perhaps Homo Naledi represents an alternative pathway to cognitive sophistication, one that achieved remarkable results through different means than those used by our own species. Deeper in the cave, away from the entrance where the toolmakers work, other activities are taking place. In a chamber that receives no natural light, several individuals work by the illumination of carefully tended torches. They are engaged in what appears to be food processing, working with plant materials that have been gathered from the surrounding landscape. The darkness of this chamber is not accidental. Many of the plants they are processing are sensitive to light, losing nutritional value or becoming less palatable when exposed to direct sunlight. By working in the darkness, they are preserving the quality of their food, applying knowledge about plant biochemistry that they have discovered through generations of experimentation. But there is something else happening here, something that goes beyond mere food processing. As they work, they communicate in low voices, sharing information, coordinating their activities, but also engaging in what can only be described as social bonding. They are not just processing food together, they are reinforcing the relationships that hold their group together, strengthening the social fabric that allows them to survive in a dangerous world. Listen to the sounds they make as they work. Some are clearly functional, warnings about sharp tools or requests for assistance, but others seem to serve no immediate practical purpose. They are sounds of companionship, of shared experience, of beings who find comfort and meaning in each other's presence. Is this the beginning of something we might recognize as culture? Are we witnessing the earliest stirrings of the human tendency to find significance, not just in survival, but in the quality of relationships, in the shared experiences that give life meaning beyond mere existence? As the morning progresses, the sounds from within the cave create a symphony of purposeful activity. The steady tap, tap, tap of stone tool making, the rustle of plant materials being processed, the soft murmur of voices engaged in coordination and companionship, the crackle of fires being maintained. All of these sounds together create an audio landscape that speaks of intelligence, cooperation, and intentionality. But there is another sound as well, one that comes not from the inhabited chambers near the entrance, but from deeper in the cave system. It is barely audible, more felt than heard, a subtle vibration that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves. Those who are sensitive to such things pause occasionally in their work, tilting their heads as if listening to something that others cannot perceive. What they are hearing is the voice of the deep cave, the movement of air through passages that extend far beyond the reach of torchlight, the settling of stones that have been stable for millennia, the whisper of underground waters flowing through channels carved by geological time. It is the sound of a world within the world, a hidden realm that exists parallel to the surface environment where most life unfolds. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is something more. Perhaps what they hear in those subtle cave sounds is an invitation, a calling toward mysteries that lie deeper in the darkness, toward chambers where their ancestors rest in eternal silence, toward questions about existence and meaning that their conscious minds are only beginning to formulate. As midday approaches, the hunting party returns. They have been successful, bringing with them not just meat, but information about the wider world. They report on the movements of herds, on changes in vegetation, on signs of other groups of Homo Naledi in the distance. This intelligence is as valuable as the food they carry, because survival in this environment depends on understanding patterns, on anticipating changes, on staying one step ahead of both opportunity and danger. The successful hunt calls for celebration, But Homo Naledi celebration is not what we might expect. There is no loud revelry, no wasteful display of abundance. Instead, there is quiet satisfaction, shared appreciation for the skills and cooperation that made success possible, and careful attention to the practical business of processing and preserving the meat. But as they work together to prepare their meal, something remarkable happens. The oldest member of the group, the female who had listened to the morning sounds, begins to make a series of rhythmic vocalizations. They are not quite song as we would understand it, but they are clearly more than random noise. They have pattern, structure, repetition. And as she continues, others begin to join in, their voices blending into something that transforms the simple act of food preparation into something approaching ritual. Is this music? Is this the earliest form of artistic expression, the first stirring of the human need to find beauty and meaning in shared activity? Or is it something even more profound, a form of communication that operates on levels we do not yet understand, a way of binding the group together through rhythmic synchronization that goes beyond mere social cooperation? As the afternoon sun slants through the cave entrance, casting long shadows across the stone floor, our group of Homo Naledi settles into the quieter activities that fill the middle hours of the day. Some rest, conserving energy for the evening's work. Others continue with maintenance tasks, repairing tools, organizing supplies, tending to the fires that never completely die. But there is something else happening as well, something that reveals perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Homo Naledi behavior. Several individuals are preparing for an expedition deeper into the cave system, into chambers that serve no obvious practical purpose, into the realm of darkness where the ancestors rest. They move with special care as they prepare, selecting torches with particular attention to their burning qualities, gathering items whose significance we can only guess at, engaging in what appears to be a form of mental preparation for a journey that is clearly different from ordinary activities. This is not hunting, this is not tool making, this is not food gathering or processing. This is something else entirely, something that requires different skills, different attitudes, different ways of thinking about the relationship between the living and the dead, between the known and the unknown, between the world of daily survival and the world of eternal mystery. And as they begin their descent into the deeper passages, carrying their small flames into the vast darkness, they embark on a journey that connects them not just to their ancestors, but to questions that will continue to haunt human consciousness for hundreds of thousands of years to come. Questions about mortality, about meaning, about what it means to be aware of one's own existence in a universe that offers no easy answers to the deepest mysteries of being alive. The shadows close around them as they disappear into the depths, and in their absence, the cave near the entrance seems to hold its breath, waiting for their return from the realm where time has no meaning, and the voices of the past whisper secrets that only the darkness knows. The torchlight flickers against the limestone walls as our expedition of Homo Naledi moves deeper into the cave system. The passage narrows here, forcing them to move in single file, their shoulders brushing against stone that has been carved by water over countless millennia. The air grows cooler as they descend, and their breath begins to form small clouds in the dancing light of their flames. Think about what drives them forward into this darkness. This is not a journey undertaken lightly or without purpose. The passages they navigate are treacherous, requiring careful placement of each step, constant awareness of low-hanging rock formations, and an intimate knowledge of the cave's geography that can only come from repeated exploration over many years. The leader of this small group carries the brightest torch, but even its light penetrates only a few feet into the surrounding darkness. Behind him, the others follow with practiced confidence, their hands occasionally touching the stone walls for guidance, their feet finding secure purchase on surfaces worn smooth by underground streams that dried up ages ago. Listen to the sounds they make as they move. Their footsteps echo softly off the cave walls, creating a rhythm that seems to synchronize with their breathing. Occasionally, one of them makes a quiet vocalization, perhaps a warning about a particularly tricky passage, or simply a sound of reassurance to the others. These are not random noises but purposeful communications, a form of echolocation that helps them navigate in near-complete darkness. As they progress deeper, the cave begins to reveal its secrets. The walls here are different from those near the entrance. They are marked with natural formations that catch and hold the torchlight in unexpected ways. Flowstone cascades down from invisible heights above, creating frozen waterfalls of mineral deposits that gleam like ancient metal in the flame's glow. Stalactites hang like stone icicles, some so low that the travelers must duck beneath them. But there is something else here, something that transforms this from merely a difficult journey into something approaching the sacred. As they round a bend in the passage, the torchlight reveals the first signs of previous human presence, not the casual debris of temporary occupation, but evidence of deliberate, purposeful activity. Here, pressed into a soft patch of cave floor, is a footprint. Not recent, but not ancient either by the standards of geological time. The impression is clear enough to see the outline of toes, the arch of a foot, the heel. It is unmistakably human, yet subtly different from what a modern human footprint would look like. The foot that made this mark was broader, more robust, adapted for a life spent largely on uneven surfaces. The expedition leader stops beside this footprint and lowers his torch to examine it more closely. The others gather around, their own flames creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness. They study the mark with intense attention, as if reading a message left by someone who walked this path before them. What are they learning from this simple impression in the cave floor? Perhaps they can determine how long ago it was made, based on the condition of the sediment around it. Perhaps they recognize the specific individual who made it, someone known to them, someone whose gait and foot shape are as familiar as their own. Or perhaps this footprint represents something more mysterious, evidence of travelers who came this way in the distant past, people whose stories have been forgotten, but whose presence still lingers in the darkness. They move on, following the passage as it curves and branches, making choices at the intersections with the confidence of people who have traveled these routes many times before. But how did they first learn the way? How did they map these dark passages in their minds, creating mental models of a three-dimensional maze that exists entirely beyond the reach of natural light? Think about the courage this required. The first explorers who ventured into these depths had no knowledge of where the passages led, no certainty that they would find a way out, No guarantee that the floor would remain solid beneath their feet, or that the ceiling would not suddenly drop too low to pass beneath. They entered the unknown armed with nothing but curiosity, determination, and the small comfort of controlled fire. Yet they persisted, driven by something that goes beyond mere practical necessity. The chambers they are approaching serve no obvious survival function. They are not storage areas for food or tools. They are not shelters from weather or predators. They are something else entirely, places set apart from the ordinary business of daily life, spaces reserved for activities that speak to deeper aspects of Homo Naledi consciousness. As the passage opens into a larger chamber, the torchlight reveals the first glimpse of their destination. The ceiling rises above them, disappearing into darkness that their flames cannot penetrate. The floor levels out, creating a natural amphitheater of stone, and scattered across this floor, arranged with obvious intentionality, are the remains of those who came before. But let us not rush to examine these ancient burials too quickly. First, let us try to understand what this moment means to our travelers, what emotions and thoughts might be passing through minds that are simultaneously so alien and so familiar to our own. They pause at the threshold of this chamber, their torches held high but not yet carried forward into the space itself. This hesitation is not born of fear but of reverence, the same careful respect that modern humans show when entering spaces designated as sacred or memorial. They are crossing a boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, between the realm of daily concerns and the realm of eternal mystery. The silence here is different from the silence of the outer passages. It is not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something more profound, a quality of stillness that seems to absorb their whispers and footsteps, transforming ordinary human noise into something that belongs to the depths rather than the surface. When they finally enter the chamber, they do so with measured steps, their movements careful and deliberate. The torchlight plays across the walls, revealing surfaces that are unmarked by human hands, but shaped by forces far older than any human presence. Water has carved these walls over geological ages, creating smooth curves and flowing lines that seem almost architectural in their elegance. But it is not the walls that draw their attention. It is what lies upon the chamber floor, the carefully arranged remains that represent the culmination of their journey into darkness. Here, positioned with obvious care and intention, are the bones of their ancestors, their community members, their loved ones who have completed the transition from life to whatever lies beyond. The arrangement is neither random nor haphazard. Each skeleton occupies its own space, positioned in ways that suggest deliberate placement rather than casual disposal. Some lie on their sides in what appears to be a sleeping position. Others are arranged on their backs, arms positioned alongside the body or folded across the chest. The variety of positions suggests different burial traditions, perhaps representing different individuals' preferences or the evolving practices of the community over time. Think about what this represents in terms of cognitive development and social organization. The decision to carry the dead into the said not just physical effort chambers require remote but conceptual planning that extends far beyond immediate survival needs. Someone had to make the initial decision that this was the appropriate way to treat the deceased. Others had to agree to participate in the difficult work of transportation. The community had to develop and maintain traditions around death that were complex enough to result in such systematic burial practices. But why here? Why carry the dead through dangerous passages into chambers so remote that reaching them required considerable effort and risk? The practical challenges alone would have been enormous. Each body would have had to be maneuvered through narrow passages, lowered down difficult drops, carried across unstable surfaces. This work could not have been done quickly or easily. It required time, planning, cooperation, and a level of commitment that speaks to beliefs and values that went far beyond mere disposal of the dead. As our travelers move among the ancient remains, their torchlight illuminating first one skeleton and then another, they engage in behaviors that provide clues about their relationship with death and with the ancestors who rest in this chamber. They do not simply pass through as if the bones were obstacles to be avoided. Instead, they pause beside certain skeletons, their attention focused with an intensity that suggests recognition, memory, or perhaps ritualistic acknowledgement. One of the travelers, a middle use beside it, her torch hell-aged female, approaches a particular skeleton and carried low to provide better illumination. The bones she examines are those of an older individual, someone who lived long enough to show the wear patterns and age-related changes that mark a life fully lived. She studies these remains with careful attention, as if reading a story written in bone and preserved in darkness. What story might these bones tell to someone who knew how to read them? Perhaps this individual was known to her, someone whose death occurred within her own lifetime. Perhaps she can see in the bone structure evidence of injuries survived, illnesses overcome, the physical challenges that marked a life lived in the demanding environment of ancient South Africa. But there may be something more here, something that suggests Homo Naledi had developed concepts of individual identity that persisted beyond death. The way she examines these remains suggests not just general respect for the dead, but specific recognition of a particular individual, as if the bones retain something of the person who once animated them. The others in the group engage in similar examinations, moving from skeleton to skeleton with purposeful attention. They are not conducting a casual survey of the chamber's contents, but participating in some form of memorial activity, a ritual of remembrance that connects the living with the dead across the boundary of mortality. As they work, they occasionally make soft vocalizations, sounds that might be names, prayers, or simply expressions of emotion too complex to categorize easily. These sounds echo strangely in the chamber, bouncing off stone walls and returning as whispered repetitions that seem to give voice to the bones themselves. The torchlight reveals details that speak to the care with which these burials were conducted. The skeletons are complete, suggesting that the bodies were brought to this chamber shortly after death, rather than being transported as disarticulated bones. They show no signs of trauma that might indicate violent death, and their positioning suggests they were placed here with respect and attention to their comfort in whatever existence might follow life. But perhaps most remarkably, the chamber shows evidence of repeated use over extended periods of time. The burials represent not a single event, but an ongoing practice, a tradition maintained across generations. Some of the skeletons show greater weathering than others, suggesting they have been here longer. Some occupy preferred positions within the chamber, perhaps indicating higher status or earlier arrival. The overall pattern suggests a burial ground that was used systematically over considerable time. Think about what this means for our understanding of Homo Naledi, social organization, and cognitive capabilities. The maintenance of burial traditions across generations requires not just individual decision making, but cultural transmission, the ability to pass complex practices from one generation to the next through teaching, demonstration, and shared participation in ritual activities. It also suggests concepts of sacred space, the designation of certain locations as set apart from ordinary use, reserved for activities that connect the community with forces or meanings beyond immediate material concerns. The chamber functions as more than just a storage area for the dead. It serves as a focal point for beliefs and practices that give meaning to life by acknowledging the reality of death. As our travelers complete their examination of the burial chamber, they begin to prepare for activities that reveal even more about the sophisticated nature of their relationship with this underground sanctuary. One of them carefully places his torch in a natural holder formed by a rock formation, positioning it to provide steady light without risking fire damage to the ancient remains. Another begins unpacking items that were brought specifically for this visit, objects whose significance becomes clear as they are arranged with ceremonial care. Among these items are pieces of ochre, the red mineral that appears so frequently in archaeological contexts associated with early human symbolic behavior. But these are not random chunks of raw material. They have been shaped, ground, prepared with obvious intention. Some have been mixed with fat or other binding agents to create pigments. Others have been carved with simple patterns, geometric designs that speak to aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic thinking. The ochre is applied to certain of the skeletons with careful, deliberate movements. Not to all of the remains, but to specific individuals, perhaps those who held particular significance within the community, or those whose deaths occurred under circumstances that called for special treatment. The red pigment stands out dramatically against the pale bone, creating visual markers that transform anonymous skeletons into individualized memorials. But the ochre serves more than just decorative purposes. Its application appears to follow specific patterns, rules that govern where and how it should be used. Some skeletons receive ochre only on the skull. Others have pigment applied to the long bones of the arms or legs. The variation suggests a symbolic vocabulary, a system of meaning that differentiated between types of individuals or categories of death. As this work proceeds, the chamber fills with the quiet sounds of purposeful activity, the soft whisper of ochre being ground between stones, the gentle scraping as pigment is applied to bone, the almost inaudible murmur of vocalizations that might be prayers, names, or simply the sounds humans make when engaged in activities that connect them to something larger than themselves. And through it all, the torchlight continues its ancient dance across the chamber walls, creating moving shadows that seem to breathe life into the static scene. In this flickering illumination, the boundary between past and present seems to dissolve. The bones of the ancestors become temporary vessels for memories that transcend individual death, and the living become temporary custodians of traditions that will outlast their own mortality. This is where the mystery of Homo Naledi becomes most profound, most challenging to our assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and the development of human-like behavior. Here, in this remote chamber lit only by controlled fire, we witness evidence of abstract thinking, symbolic behavior, and spiritual concerns that seem to require cognitive capabilities far beyond what we might expect from a species with such a small brain. How did they develop these sophisticated concepts of death, memory, and sacred space? How did they create and maintain the complex social structures necessary to carry out such elaborate burial practices? How did they bridge the gap between practical intelligence and symbolic thinking, between the immediate concerns of survival and the abstract questions of meaning and mortality? These questions hover in the torchlit darkness of the burial chamber like unseen spirits, like the whispered voices of ancestors whose stories we are only beginning to understand. And as our travelers complete their ritual work and prepare to begin the journey back to the surface world, they carry these mysteries with them, along with the knowledge that they too will someday rest in the darkness, their own bones becoming part of the ongoing story that connects life and death in the depths of the earth. The return journey begins quietly, almost reluctantly. The travelers extinguish some of their torches, conserving fuel for the trip back through the winding passages. But they do not leave the burial chamber in haste. They pause at the threshold, looking back into the space they are leaving, as if committing the scene to memory, or perhaps saying farewell to the ancestors who will remain in the eternal darkness. When they finally turn away and begin retracing their steps through the narrow passages, they carry with them more than just the physical evidence of their visit. They carry stories, memories, and perhaps most importantly, the knowledge that they have participated in something that connects them to the deepest mysteries of existence. They have touched the boundary between life and death, between the known and the unknown, between the world of immediate experience and the realm of eternal questions. And as their torchlight fades into the depths, as the sounds of their passage grow distant and finally disappear, the burial chamber returns to its ancient silence, waiting patiently for the next visitors who will make the difficult journey into darkness to honor the dead and confront the mysteries that define what it means to be conscious, mortal, and profoundly, irreducibly human. The cave grows quiet as the last echoes of footsteps fade into the limestone depths. Above ground, the African night continues its ancient rhythm. Stars wheel overhead in patterns that have guided the travelers for millennia, their light never penetrating the chambers where our mysterious ancestors conducted their most sacred rituals. But the surface world, too, holds secrets of Homo Naledi's existence, stories written in the rocks, and sediments that tell of lives lived under skies we can barely imagine. Picture the landscape as it was 250,000 years ago, when these caves first became home to a species that would challenge everything we thought we knew about intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be human. The grasslands stretched endlessly under a sun that seemed both familiar and alien. The climate was cooler then, wetter, supporting vast herds of creatures that no longer walk the earth. Giant buffalo with horns that spanned 6 feet moved across the plains like living monuments. Saber-toothed cats stalked through tall grass that whispered secrets to the wind. In this world of giants and predators, Homo Naledi carved out their existence through a combination of intelligence, cooperation, and an intimate understanding of the landscape that sustained them. They knew which plants provided the best medicine, which stones flaked into the sharpest tools, which water sources remained clean through the dry seasons. But more than that, they knew something about themselves, something that drove them to create meaning in a world that offered no easy answers. The morning sun filters through the cave entrance where we left our travelers, casting long shadows across stone floors worn smooth by countless generations of feet. Those who remained behind during the burial expedition wait with the patient attention of people who understand that some journeys cannot be hurried, that some ceremonies require their own time to unfold properly male sits. An older near the fire, working on a task that speaks to the sophisticated nature of Homo Naledi technology. Before him lies a wooden shaft, straight and strong, carved from a tree that grew in the valley below. But this is not merely a stick. It is the foundation of a composite tool, a spear that will combine wood, stone, and organic binding materials into something far more effective than any single component could be alone. Watch as he works with materials that required planning, foresight, and knowledge that extended far beyond immediate needs. The shaft itself represents hours of careful selection, cutting, and shaping. Not just any wood would do. It had to be strong enough to withstand impact, flexible enough to absorb shock, straight enough to fly true when thrown. The tree from which it came was probably marked and observed for seasons before being harvested, its growth monitored to ensure it would provide the right properties. The stone point that will tip this spear lies beside him, a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. The flint was heat-treated to improve its flaking properties, a process that required understanding of fire temperatures, timing, and the molecular changes that occur when certain stones are subjected to controlled heating. The knapping that shaped it into a deadly point required not just skill, but an almost artistic vision of the finished product. But perhaps most remarkably, the binding that will hold these components together represents knowledge that took generations to develop. Plant fibers have been processed into cordage, strong enough to withstand the shock of impact. Tree resin has been collected and prepared as an adhesive, its properties enhanced by the addition of other organic materials in proportions that suggest experimental refinement over long periods of time. This single spear represents the accumulated knowledge of countless individuals, techniques passed down through generations, innovations built upon innovations. It embodies the collective intelligence of a species that had learned to extend its capabilities far beyond what nature had provided, to transform raw materials into tools that multiplied their effectiveness as hunters and survivors. As he works, binding stone to wood with cordage and resin, his movements are practiced, automatic, but his mind seems elsewhere, perhaps contemplating the expedition that is even now making its way back through the dark passages below. The connection between the living and the dead is never far from consciousness, in a world where survival depends on the wisdom of ancestors, where the accumulated knowledge of the past provides the foundation for present survival. The sun climbs higher, warming the grassland beyond the cave entrance. In the distance, smoke rises from other camps, evidence that Homo Naledi lived not in isolation, but as part of a network of communities spread across the landscape. These were not random gatherings of individuals, but organized societies with their own territories, traditions, and complex relationships with neighboring groups. Think about what this means for our understanding of their social development. They had learned to balance cooperation within their own groups with competition for resources between groups. They had developed systems for sharing information about environmental conditions, animal movements, and potential threats. They had created protocols for resolving disputes and establishing boundaries that allowed multiple communities to coexist in the same general region. The evidence for this social complexity lies not just in the archaeological record, but in the very existence of their burial practices. The elaborate rituals we witnessed in the deep chambers could only have developed in societies sophisticated enough to maintain traditions across generations, to invest significant labor in activities that provided no immediate survival benefit, to create and maintain sacred spaces that served the entire community. A sound from the cave depths interrupts these contemplations. The soft echo of footsteps on stone, the barely audible murmur of voices, the faint glow of torchlight beginning to strengthen as it approaches the entrance. The burial expedition is returning, carrying with them the satisfaction of duties fulfilled and rituals properly observed. They emerge from the darkness slowly, blinking in the morning light, their torches now pale and insignificant compared to the sun streaming through the cave entrance. Their faces show the particular kind of weariness that comes not from physical exhaustion, but from emotional intensity, from participating in activities that touch the deepest levels of meaning and significance. But there is something else in their expressions as well, something harder to define, a sense of connection, perhaps, to forces larger than themselves, a quiet satisfaction that comes from maintaining the ancient contracts between the living and the dead, between the present community and the ancestors who established the traditions that continue to guide daily life. As they rejoin their companions near the fire, they bring with them more than just their own experiences. They bring renewed connection to the cultural foundations that make their society possible, fresh reinforcement of the beliefs and practices that distinguish their community from the merely biological existence of other species. The ochre stains on their hands yet tell part of the story. The red pigment that adorned the ancient bones still marks their fingers, creating a visible link between past and present, between the work they have just completed and the ongoing responsibilities of the living. This ochre is not just decoration, but a form of communication, a language written in mineral and meaning that speaks across generations. But why ochre? Why this particular substance, found in deposits scattered across the South African landscape, processed and applied with such care and intention? Modern researchers have debated this question extensively, proposing theories that range from purely practical to deeply symbolic. Perhaps ochre served practical purposes we do not fully understand. Its iron oxide content might have provided protection against insects or ultraviolet radiation. Its antimicrobial properties might have helped preserve organic materials or provided primitive medicine. But the care with which it was prepared and applied, the specific patterns of its use, the effort required to obtain and process it, all suggest purposes that go far beyond simple utility. More likely, ochre represented one of humanity's earliest ventures into symbolic thinking, the use of material substances to represent abstract concepts. The red color might have symbolized blood, life, vitality, or the continuation of existence beyond death. Its application to the bones of the ancestors might have been intended to restore them symbolically to life, to maintain their connection to the living community, to ensure their continued presence and influence. As the morning progresses, the returned expedition members integrate back into the daily routines of cave life. But their recent experience in the burial chambers has left its mark on them, creating a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the entire group. There is a heightened awareness of mortality, of the temporary nature of individual existence, that makes the present moment seem both more precious and more fragile. This awareness manifests itself in small ways throughout the day. A mother holds her child a little longer, a little more tightly. Partners exchange glances that carry deeper meaning. Elders are listened to with greater attention, their words carrying the weight of wisdom that will someday be silenced forever. The recent encounter with death has paradoxically intensified their appreciation for life. In the middle distance, movement catches their attention. A group of figures approaches across the grassland, still too far away to identify, but close enough to require watchfulness. In this world, where resources are limited and territories must be defended, the approach of strangers always carries the possibility of both opportunity and danger. The visitors prove to be members of a neighboring Homo Naledi community, travelers who have made the journey from caves located several valleys away. Their arrival is not unexpected. These intergroup visits occur regularly, serving multiple purposes that reveal the sophisticated social networks that connected distant communities. First, and most obviously, these visits allow for the exchange of genetic material, the prevention of inbreeding that could weaken small isolated populations. Young adults from different communities meet, form relationships, and sometimes relocate permanently to their partner's group. These genetic exchanges are essential for the long-term survival of the species, but they require social structures sophisticated enough to manage the complex negotiations involved in intergroup marriages. But genetic exchange is only one function of these visits. Perhaps equally important is the sharing of information. The visitors bring news of environmental conditions in distant areas, reports of animal movements, and seasonal changes that might affect hunting strategies, warnings of potential threats or opportunities that could impact survival decisions. Listen as they share their knowledge around the fire that evening. Their voices carry the particular rhythm of storytelling, but these are not entertainment tales. These are information transfers, vital data passed from community to community through the networks that bind Homo Naledi society together. They speak of a drought developing in the southern valleys, of herds beginning to migrate earlier than usual toward better grazing areas. They report on the discovery of new toolstone deposits in the eastern hills, on change in river courses that might affect access to water. They share news of births and deaths in their own community, reinforcing the social connections that make them all part of a larger human family. But most intriguingly, they also share stories of their own burial practices, comparisons, and contrasts with the rituals observed by their hosts. These exchanges reveal that while the basic pattern of cave burial was widespread among Homo Naledi communities, there were also variations, local traditions that had developed over time in different locations. Some groups, they learn, place their dead in different positions. Others use different materials for decoration or ritual purposes. Some have developed elaborate ceremonies that precede the actual burial, while others focus their attention on post-burial memorial practices. These variations suggest a species capable of cultural innovation, of adapting basic practices to local conditions and preferences while maintaining the essential elements that define the tradition. As the evening deepens and the conversations continue, children from both groups play together near the fire, their games unconsciously rehearsing the skills they will need as adults. They practice hunting techniques, social cooperation, and conflict resolution, all disguised as entertainment, but actually serving as education for their future roles in society. The games reveal something remarkable about Homo Naledi child development. Unlike many species, where play behavior is purely instinctual, these children are engaging in activities that require planning, rule-making, and the kind of abstract thinking that suggests advanced cognitive development from an early age. Watch as they create elaborate scenarios involving imaginary dangers and imaginary solutions. One child pretends to be injured and must be rescued by the others. Another plays the role of a predator, while the rest must cooperate to drive it away. These games teach not just individual skills, but group dynamics, the complex social relationships that make survival possible in a dangerous world. But there is something else in their play as well, something that suggests the early stirring of the symbolic thinking that will someday express itself in the burial rituals of adulthood. They create imaginary objects, assign magical properties to ordinary stones and sticks, engage in pretend ceremonies that mirror the ritual behaviors they observe in their elders. This capacity for symbolic play appears early in Homo Naledi development, suggesting that the cognitive abilities required for abstract thinking are not learned skills, but fundamental aspects of their mental architecture. The same neural structures that allow them to imagine non-existent hunting scenarios in childhood will later enable them to conceive of life continuing beyond death, of ancestors who remain present, though physically absent. As the night deepens, the visiting group prepares temporary shelters near the cave entrance. They will stay for several days, participating in joint hunting expeditions, sharing in tool-making workshops, and contributing to the ongoing maintenance of the cave system that provides protection for both communities. But tonight, as they arrange their bedding and prepare for sleep, the conversations continue in quieter tones. The adults speak of things that children are not meant to hear, adult concerns about resource management, territorial boundaries, and the complex politics that govern relationships between communities. These conversations reveal another layer of Homo Naledi social sophistication. They are not just capable of cooperation within their own groups, but of maintaining peaceful relationships with other groups across considerable distances. They have developed diplomatic protocols, systems for resolving disputes, and methods for coordinating activities that benefit multiple communities simultaneously. Think about what this requires in terms of cognitive ability and social organization. They must be able to understand perspectives different from their own, to negotiate agreements that balance competing interests, to maintain commitments across time and space. These are advanced social skills that suggest not just intelligence, but wisdom. the kind of practical understanding of human nature that comes only from generations of experience with complex social relationships. As sleep begins to claim both communities, the cave grows quiet except for the soft sounds of breathing and the gentle crackle of carefully maintained fires. But even in sleep, the connections forged during the day continue to strengthen. Dreams blend individual experiences into shared memories, creating the psychological foundations that will support future cooperation and mutual assistance. And in the deeper chambers where the ancestors rest, the silence is complete but not empty. It is filled with the accumulated presence of all those who have gone before, whose bones bear witness to the continuity of Homo Naledi existence, whose memory provides the foundation for everything that the living have accomplished and will accomplish in the future. The mystery of these ancient cave dwellers deepens with each discovery, each new understanding of their capabilities and their limitations. They possessed intelligence that seems almost impossible given their brain size. They developed social structures of remarkable complexity. They created symbolic systems that allowed them to communicate across time through ritual and tradition. Yet they remained trapped within the constraints of their environment, limited by technologies that, while sophisticated for their time, could not overcome the fundamental challenges of survival in a world dominated by predators, climate change, and resource scarcity. They lived on the edge of extinction, their small communities scattered across vast landscapes, their survival dependent on knowledge that could be lost in a single generation if not carefully preserved and transmitted. Perhaps this precarious existence is what drove them to develop such elaborate systems for honoring and remembering the dead. In a world where individual life was fragile and uncertain, the creation of permanent memorials might have represented their attempt to achieve a kind of immortality, to ensure that something of themselves would persist beyond the brief span of biological existence. Or perhaps their burial practices reflected insights into the nature of consciousness that we are only beginning to understand. Did they recognize something about the relationship between mind and matter, between individual awareness and the larger patterns of existence that continue beyond death? Did their rituals represent primitive attempts to grapple with questions that still challenge human understanding today? These questions hover in the darkness above the sleeping communities, like unseen spirits, like the whispered voices of ancestors whose stories we are only beginning to piece together from fragmentary evidence scattered across the landscape of deep time. They remind us that intelligence takes many forms, that consciousness expresses itself through countless variations, and that the story of what it means to be human is far more complex and mysterious than we ever imagined. The night passes quietly, marked only by the subtle shifts of sleepers adjusting their positions, the occasional soft murmur of dream speech, and the patient crackling of fires tended by those who wake briefly to add fuel before returning to sleep. In the burial chambers below, the ancestors keep their eternal vigil, their bones bearing witness to the ongoing story of their descendants who continue to gather above them, generation after generation, maintaining the ancient traditions while slowly adapting to an ever-changing world. And as the first pale light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, preparing to wake the cave dwellers to another day of survival, cooperation, and mysterious ritual, the questions that surround Homo Naledi remain as profound and challenging as ever, waiting for answers that may come only through continued exploration of the darkness that holds their secrets. Dawn breaks slowly over the South African grasslands, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. The air is crisp with the coolness that comes just before sunrise, carrying scents of dew-dampened earth and the distant promise of warmth. Inside the cave, the two communities begin to stir, their internal rhythms synchronized with the ancient dance of light and darkness that has governed life since the beginning of time. The fires that burned through the night have settled into beds of glowing coals, still radiating enough heat to ward off the morning chill. Someone, perhaps one of the elders who sleep lightly and wake frequently, has already added fresh fuel. Small flames begin to lick upward from the embers, casting familiar dancing shadows on the limestone walls that have witnessed countless such mornings. Think about this moment, this transition from the vulnerability of sleep to the alertness required for survival. In our modern world, we wake to alarms, to artificial light, to the immediate demands of schedules and obligations. But these ancient people wake naturally, gradually, their consciousness emerging from sleep, like swimmers rising slowly through layers of water toward the surface. The first to fully wake is a young mother, her infant stirring against her chest. The child's needs are immediate, biological, uncomplicated by the complex thoughts that will soon occupy the adult minds around them. As she tends to her baby, her movements are quiet, careful not to disturb others who are still transitioning between sleep and wakefulness. But her gentleness is not just consideration for her companions. It reflects a deeper understanding of the Rith life, MS, that govern cave sudden movements, loud noises, anything that disrupts the careful balance of their underground sanctuary can have consequences that ripple through the entire community. The cave amplifies sounds, echoes them back in ways that can startle sleepers or alert potential dangers to their presence. As others begin to wake, the cave fills with the soft sounds of a community coming to life, the rustle of bedding being arranged, the quiet murmur of morning greetings exchanged in the simple vocalizations that serve as their language, the gentle scraping of hands and knees on stone as people shift positions or rise to tend to various needs. The visitors from the neighboring community wake with the same gradual care as their hosts. Despite being in unfamiliar surroundings, they show no signs of anxiety or uncertainty. This comfort speaks to the sophisticated protocols that govern inter-community relationships among Homo Naledi groups. Trust has been established through generations of peaceful interaction, creating a foundation of mutual respect that allows for such casual hospitality. Picture the complexity of social knowledge required to maintain these relationships. Each community must remember not only their own traditions and practices, but also the variations observed in other groups. They must understand which differences are acceptable, even interesting, and which might indicate dangerous deviations from shared cultural norms. They must navigate the delicate balance between maintaining their own identity and remaining open to the influences that come with regular contact with other communities. As the morning light grows stronger at the cave entrance, it illuminates details that were hidden in the darkness. The walls near the opening show signs of long human occupation. Smoke stains mark the areas above regularly used fire pits. Worn patches on the floor indicate the most frequently traveled paths. Small alcoves have been carved or enlarged to serve as storage areas for tools, food, and other essential items. But most significantly, the walls themselves bear marks that go beyond simple utility. Here and there, scratched into the stone with sharp implements, are patterns that serve no obvious practical purpose. Parallel lines, cross-hatching, simple geometric shapes. These marks represent some of the earliest evidence of symbolic thinking, the human tendency to impose meaning and pattern onto the world through deliberate modification of the environment. Think about what drove them to make these marks. They required time and effort that could have been spent on survival activities. They served no immediate practical function, yet something in the Homo Naledi mind compelled them to leave these traces, these messages whose meaning we can only guess at. Were they territorial markers, artistic expression, religious symbols, or something else entirely? Some form of communication or record keeping that we do not yet understand. As the community fully awakens, the morning activities begin with the same careful coordination that characterizes all aspects of their social life. Tasks are distributed not through explicit discussion, but through the kind of automatic understanding that comes from long practice living together in small groups. Everyone knows their role, their responsibilities, their place in the complex web of relationships that makes survival possible. The fire tenders add more fuel and begin arranging cooking areas. The tool makers examine their work from the previous day and assess what needs to be completed. The food preparers begin sorting through gathered materials, deciding what should be consumed immediately and what should be processed for longer storage. The childminders organize the young ones, ensuring they remain safe while allowing them the freedom to play and learn. But there is something different about this morning, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that reflects the presence of visitors and the recent journey to the burial chambers. The normal routine proceeds, but it is accompanied by a heightened awareness of community, of connection to something larger than immediate survival needs. The visitors contribute to the morning work with the same natural integration they showed the night before, but they also bring their own perspectives, their own ways of accomplishing familiar tasks. As they work alongside their hosts, subtle exchanges of technique and knowledge occur. A different way of hafting a stone point, a variation in food processing that produces better results, a slight modification to fire management that conserves fuel while maintaining heat. These exchanges represent more than just practical improvements. They are the mechanism by which innovation spreads through Homo Naledi society, the process by which isolated discoveries become widespread knowledge. Without written language or formal educational institutions, cultural evolution depends entirely on these personal interactions, these moments when individuals from different communities work side by side and learn from each other. As the morning progresses, a decision emerges from the subtle negotiations that govern group activities. Today will be devoted to a joint hunting expedition, a coordinated effort that will take advantage of the increased numbers provided by the visiting community. Such expeditions are rare, requiring careful planning and the kind of trust that comes only from long-established relationships between groups. The preparation for this hunt reveals another layer of Homo Naledi social sophistication. This is not simply a matter of gathering more people to chase the same prey. The combined group must coordinate different hunting traditions, reconcile different approaches to strategy and tactics, and establish temporary leadership structures that respect the autonomy of both communities while ensuring effective decision-making. Watch as they work through these challenges. The discussion is conducted through a combination of simple vocalizations, hand gestures, and shared examination of tools and terrain. There are no formal debates or explicit negotiations, yet somehow consensus emerges about routes to take, roles to play, and methods to employ. The weapons prepared for this expedition represent the pinnacle of Homo Naledi technology. Spears with carefully shaped stone points, bound to wooden shafts with plant fiber cordage, and sealed with tree resin adhesives. Throwing sticks balanced and carved for maximum accuracy. Stone knives hafted into handles that multiply their effectiveness as cutting tools. But the most sophisticated technology on display is not material, but social. The hunters organize themselves into a complex formation that takes advantage of their understanding of animal behavior, terrain features, and group coordination. Some will serve as drivers, their job to move prey toward predetermined locations. Others will act as interceptors, positioned to block escape routes or capitalize on opportunities created by the drivers. Still others will serve as reserves, ready to respond to unexpected developments or to assist in the final stages of a successful hunt. Think about the cognitive demands of such coordination. Each hunter must understand not only their own role, but how that role fits into the overall strategy. They must be able to anticipate the actions of both prey and other hunters, adjusting their behavior in real time as circumstances change. They must communicate effectively without alerting their quarry to their presence. They must balance individual initiative with group discipline, knowing when to stick to the plan and when to improvise. As the hunting party prepares to leave the cave, those remaining behind face their own complex set of responsibilities. The cave must be maintained and defended. Food processing must continue. Tools must be manufactured and repaired. Children must be supervised and educated. The elderly and infirm must be cared for. But perhaps most importantly, the sacred aspects of community life must be preserved and continued. The fires that connect the living to the ancestors must be tended. The traditions that define group identity must be practiced and transmitted. The burial chambers must be monitored and maintained, ensuring that the resting places of the dead remain secure and appropriately honored. Among those staying behind is the elderly female who had examined the ancient remains so carefully during the previous day's burial expedition. Today she takes on the role of primary guardian of the cave's spiritual dimensions, the keeper of traditions that connect present activities to the deeper meanings that give life significance beyond mere survival. She moves through the cave with the slow deliberation of age, but also with the purposeful attention of someone conducting important work. At various points along the familiar passages, she pauses to make small adjustments to the environment. A stone moved slightly to improve the flow of air, a torch relocated to provide better illumination for particular activities. These changes seem minor, almost insignificant, but they reflect a deep understanding of how small modifications can improve the overall functioning of the cave community. In the deeper passages, she checks on the condition of the burial chambers, ensuring that nothing has been disturbed, that the arrangements made during yesterday's ceremony remain intact. But this is more than just maintenance. Her presence in these sacred spaces serves to maintain the connection between the living and the dead, to reinforce the spiritual foundations that support the community's sense of identity and purpose. As she works, she occasionally makes soft vocalizations, sounds that might be prayers, names, or simply expressions of respect and remembrance. These sounds echo strangely in the confined spaces, creating an acoustic environment that seems to give voice to the stones themselves, as if the very walls of the cave were participating in the spiritual life of the community. Meanwhile, on the surface, the hunting expedition moves across the grassland with the coordinated precision of a well-rehearsed performance. But this performance has been rehearsed not through explicit practice, but through generations of shared experience, techniques refined through countless hunts and passed down through the complex networks of knowledge that bind Homo Naledi society together. The landscape they traverse is both beautiful and dangerous. The grass waves gently in the morning breeze, creating patterns of light and shadow that can conceal both predator and prey. Scattered trees provide shade and landmarks, but also potential ambush points for the large carnivores that compete with humans for territory and resources. Water sources glisten in the distance, essential for life, but also gathering points where conflicts over access can erupt suddenly and violently. The hunters read this landscape like a text written in earth and vegetation. They understand the subtle signs that indicate the recent passage of different species. The bent grass that shows which direction a herd was traveling. The disturbed soil that reveals where animals came to drink. The scattered droppings that indicate both the type and number of creatures in the area. But they read more than just animal signs. They also interpret the human modifications to the landscape, the almost invisible marks left by other Homo Naledi groups who use the same hunting grounds. A pile of stones arranged in a particular pattern might indicate a successful hunt in this location. Broken branches positioned at specific angles might warn of dangers encountered or opportunities discovered. This system of environmental communication represents another form of technology, a way of storing and transmitting information that does not depend on the presence of the individuals who created it. It allows different hunting parties, even from different communities, to share knowledge across time and space, contributing to a collective understanding of the landscape that benefits all who know how to read the signs. As the morning hunt unfolds across the grassland, the sounds of their activity create their own form of communication. The soft whisper of feet moving through grass, the barely audible click of stone tools being adjusted, the almost subliminal vocalizations used to coordinate movement without alerting prey. These sounds blend with the natural audio landscape of the African savanna, creating a symphony of survival that is played out across countless mornings for hundreds of thousands of years. Back in the cave, the sounds are different but equally meaningful. The rhythmic tapping of stone tool manufacture, the soft scraping of plant processing, the gentle murmur of conversation and instruction as knowledge is passed from one generation to the next. the occasional cry of an infant, quickly soothed by attentive caregivers. All of these sounds together create the acoustic signature of a functioning human community, a soundscape that speaks to cooperation, security, and the kind of social stability that allows for the development of complex cultural traditions. In the burial chambers, silence reigns absolute, but it is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of presence, of accumulated memory, of stories that continue to influence the living, even though their tellers have long since joined the ancestors. This silence is part of the spiritual ecosystem of the cave, a necessary counterpoint to the activity and noise of daily life, a reminder that existence includes dimensions that transcend immediate material concerns. As the day progresses, news arrives from the hunting expedition. A young runner, left behind by the main group, returns to the cave with updates on their progress. The hunters have located a small herd of antelope and are maneuvering to position themselves for an attempt. The operation is proceeding according to plan, but success is not yet assured. This communication system represents another aspect of Homo Naledi social sophistication. The hunting party has not simply disappeared into the grassland and left their community without information. They have maintained connection through a relay system that allows for ongoing coordination between those who hunt and those who wait. If the hunt is successful, the cave dwellers will be able to prepare for the processing and storage of meat. If it fails, they will know to intensify their own food gathering activities. The runner who brings this news is young, perhaps 16 or 17 by modern standards, but already fully integrated into the adult responsibilities of the community. His role as messenger requires not just physical endurance, but also the ability to observe accurately, remember precisely, and communicate clearly. He must understand the significance of what he observes and be able to convey that significance to others who were not present to witness events firsthand. As he delivers his report, the cave community responds with the kind of coordinated activity that demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of group dynamics and resource management. Preparations begin for multiple possible outcomes. If the hunt succeeds, they will need processing tools, storage containers, and additional fuel for the fires that will be used to cook and preserve meat. If it fails, they will need to organize their own foraging expeditions to ensure adequate nutrition for the enlarged community. But there is something else in their response, something that reveals the emotional dimensions of Homo Naledi's social life. There is anticipation, certainly, and practical concern for the outcome, but there is also something that can only be described as caring, a genuine concern for the welfare of community members who are facing the risk inherent in hunting dangerous animals in an unpredictable environment. This emotional investment in each other's welfare represents one of the most fundamentally human aspects of Homo Naledi behavior. They have moved beyond the simple cooperation required for mutual survival and developed the kind of emotional bonds that make individual welfare a community concern. They care about each other not just as useful contributors to group survival, but as individuals whose presence enriches the social fabric of their shared existence. As the afternoon sun climbs toward its peak, casting shorter shadows and warming the cave entrance, the waiting community settles into the patient rhythm that characterizes periods of uncertainty. There is work to be done, always work to be done, but the major activities are suspended pending news from the hunt. This waiting is not passive, but actively engaged, a state of readiness that allows for immediate response to whatever developments may occur. In this suspended time, other activities emerge that reveal different aspects of Homo Naledi culture and cognition. Near the cave entrance, where the light is best, several individuals engage in what can only be described as artistic activity. They work with pieces of ochre, grinding the mineral into powder, mixing it with various binding agents, and applying it to flat pieces of stone in patterns that serve no obvious practical purpose. The designs they create are simple but deliberate: parallel lines, dots arranged in geometric patterns, cross-hatching that creates areas of different visual density. These are not random marks, but intentional compositions, evidence of aesthetic sensibility and symbolic thinking that goes far beyond immediate survival concerns. Think about what this represents in terms of cognitive evolution and cultural development. These individuals are using their limited free time, their precious reserves of energy, to create objects that have no survival value, but that clearly provide some form of satisfaction or meaning. They are investing in beauty, in pattern, in the kind of symbolic expression that characterizes human culture across all times and places. As they work, they occasionally show their creations to others, seeking some form of approval or sharing some form of meaning that the designs represent. These interactions suggest that the artistic activity is not purely personal, but has social dimensions, that the patterns and symbols carry significance that can be communicated and shared among community members. But what do these symbols mean? Are they representations of natural phenomena, abstract expressions of emotional states, proto-linguistic symbols that carry specific semantic content, or are they something else entirely, experiments in meaning-making that represent the earliest stirrings of the human tendency to find significance in pattern and form? We cannot know for certain, but the care and attention devoted to their creation suggests they are more than mere decoration. They represent the emergence of symbolic thinking, the distinctly human capacity to create meaning through the manipulation of abstract forms and patterns. As the afternoon wears on, sounds from the distance indicate the return of the hunting party. But these are not the triumphant calls that might accompany such a successful hunt. Instead, they are the quieter sounds of people moving with the steady rhythm of those carrying heavy burdens, the acoustic signature of success rather than failure. The runner who had brought earlier news now returns again, this time with confirmation. The hunt has been successful, the antelope have been taken, and the hunting party is making its way back to the cave with meat enough to feed both communities for several days. The careful coordination, the patient planning, the skillful execution of complex strategies have all paid off in the most fundamental currency of survival: food. The cave community responds to this news with a level of organized activity that demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of resource management and food processing. This is not simply a matter of cooking and eating the fresh meat. Much of it must be processed for preservation, ensuring that the benefits of today's success extend into the future when hunting may be less successful. Fires are built up to the high temperatures needed for proper cooking. Stone knives are sharpened for the detailed work of butchering. Plant materials are gathered for the complex processes of meat preservation that will allow portions of the kill to remain edible for weeks or even months. These preparation activities require knowledge that has been accumulated over generations, techniques that represent the collective wisdom of countless individuals who faced similar challenges of feast and famine. But the response to the hunting success goes beyond mere practicality. There is an emotional dimension as well, a sense of celebration and communal satisfaction that transforms the work of food processing into something approaching ritual. This is not just about survival. It is about the successful functioning of the social systems that make survival possible, about the validation of the knowledge and traditions that guide community life. As the hunting party finally arrives at the cave, carrying their burden of meat and the tools of their success, they are greeted not just with practical assistance, but with the kind of recognition that acknowledges their contribution to community welfare. There are no elaborate ceremonies, no formal speeches, but there is a quality of attention and respect that honors both their skill and their willingness to accept the risks that hunting entails. The meat they carry represents more than just nutrition. It embodies the successful application of knowledge, the effective coordination of complex social activities, and the kind of trust and cooperation that allows small human communities to thrive in dangerous environments. It is a tangible symbol of everything that makes Homo Naledi culture possible. As the afternoon shadows begin to lengthen and the work of processing the hunt's success gets underway, the cave fills with the sounds and smells of a community celebrating abundance while simultaneously preparing for future scarcity. The contrast between these two activities, celebration and preparation, reveals the sophisticated temporal thinking that characterizes Homo Naledi cognition. They live fully in the present moment, appreciating the immediate benefits of their success, but they also think systematically about the future, understanding that today's abundance must be managed carefully to provide security during periods when hunting is less successful. This balance between present enjoyment and future planning represents a form of wisdom that goes far beyond simple intelligence. And as the day draws toward evening, as the work of processing and preservation continues by firelight, as the two communities share not just food, but stories and knowledge and the companionship that makes survival meaningful, the mysteries that surround these ancient people seem to deepen rather than resolve. How did they develop such sophisticated social systems with brains so much smaller than our own? How did they create cultural traditions complex enough to maintain burial practices across generations? How did they balance the immediate demands of survival with the abstract concerns that drove them to honor their dead and create symbolic expressions of meaning and beauty? These questions hover in the firelit darkness of the cave, like the whispered voices of ancestors, like the echoes of thoughts that bridge the gap between animal existence and human consciousness, between mere survival and the search for significance that defines our species even today. And as the firelight dances against the ancient walls, casting moving shadows that seem to bring the cave itself to life, we find ourselves drawn deeper into the mystery of these remarkable beings. The evening meal has been shared, the successful hunt celebrated with quiet satisfaction, But now something else begins to unfold in the depths of the cave system, something that will challenge everything we think we know about intelligence, consciousness, and what it means to be human. In the deeper chambers, where no natural light has ever penetrated, a different kind of activity is taking place. Several members of the community have gathered in a space that archaeologists would later call the workshop chamber, a natural amphitheater of stone where the acoustics create a unique environment for sound and communication. Here, in the flickering glow of carefully placed torches, they engage in the activities that go far beyond mere survival. Think about this for a moment. These ancient people, with brains 1/3 the size of our own, have chosen to spend precious time and energy in activities that serve no immediate practical purpose. They sit in a circle on the smooth stone floor, their faces illuminated by the warm light of burning wood, and they make sounds together. Not random noise, but purposeful vocalizations that follow patterns, rhythms, structures that suggest something approaching what we might recognize as music. The sounds they create are haunting in their simplicity. Low humming tones that resonate in the stone chamber, creating harmonies that seem to emerge from the walls themselves. Rhythmic clicking made by striking stones together in precise sequences. Soft whistling melodies that rise and fall like the wind across the grasslands above. Together, these sounds weave into something that transcends the sum of their parts, something that speaks to capabilities we never expected to find in such ancient minds. But why do they do this? What drives them to spend energy on activities that contribute nothing to their immediate survival? Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of consciousness itself, in the mysterious emergence of self-awareness that creates needs beyond food, shelter, and reproduction. Perhaps music, even in its most primitive forms, serves functions that go deeper than entertainment or communication. Watch as they create their simple symphony in the torchlit chamber. Their eyes are closed or focused on some invisible point in the distance, their faces showing the kind of concentration that comes not from effort, but from complete absorption in the activity itself. They are not performing for an audience. They are participating in something that seems to connect them to each other and to something larger than themselves. And so, as the echoes of their simple melodies fade into the limestone depths, as the torches burn lower and the shadows grow longer, we come to the end of our journey into the world of Homo Naledi. These mysterious cave dwellers, with their small brains and profound mysteries, their sophisticated burial rituals and haunting questions, have shown us that the story of being human is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. In the darkness of Rising Star Cave, where their bones still rest in eternal silence, the whispers of ancient voices remind us that consciousness takes many forms, that intelligence blooms in unexpected ways, and that the search for meaning began long before we thought possible. The caves of South Africa hold their secrets still, waiting patiently for dreamers and wanderers to listen to the stories written in stone and shadow. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the depths of time, firelight still flickers against ancient walls, and the mystery of what it means to be human continues to unfold in the gentle darkness where all stories begin.